All About Eve from 1950 won the Best Picture Oscar for 51. Quick summary: a seemingly timid but secretly ruthless ingenue insinuates herself into the lives of an aging Broadway star and a circle of theater friends, starring Betty Davis, Ann Baxter, George Sanders, Celeste Holm, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, written as well, was up for 14 Academy Awards, won Best Picture, Director, Screenplay. George Sanders won two. I think it won like four or five. But to me, this movie's on my list, and my number one is when I think about what is sort of the Oscar movie of the A for the ages. For some reason, I think about this movie, and I've tried to kind of break that down a little bit, which is number one, it's a movie about showbiz, literally. It is about kind of the changing guard in the movie itself, but also in the industry at that time. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Obviously, masterfully directed, beautifully written as a story in itself, but also gives you amazing lines that are quotable till this date. Fasten your seatbelts is going to
Oh
be
yeah.
right.
Oh yeah.
Night, sorry. Brilliant performances by everybody, like a true ensemble, but an ensemble that is not just about the acting, it is about the filmmaking as well. And I think there aren't that many movies, in my mind at least. It's sort of, I feel like this movie is on the level of your Cuckoo's Nest entry, where it sort of fires on all cylinders.
Yeah.
But I think it sort of puts it above in my mind as an Oscar movie is because it's a showbiz movie and what it's trying to say about, ambition and greed and who exploits who really, who is the underdog after all, and who does the industry and the world at large recognize and reward, and what are the costs that we pay to get to that place. So I feel like so many of the narratives of the industry and the campaigning and the Oscar, all of it are kind of captured in this movie. And I don't know, again, in sort of post Weinstein time, we would think that this is like the classic Oscar bait movie. Like if this movie was made anytime in the last, like, I don't know, 15 years, this would be labeled an Oscar bait movie. But I don't know if that word existed at that time in the 50s, So,
Right.
and I think the reason why this movie holds the test of time and is so brilliant is because I don't think they were aware of that construct that, oh, we are making this movie for the Oscars. Maybe a little bit, but who knows? It doesn't feel that on the nose, because I feel like anything that on the nose would not hold the test of time. It'll become stodgy very quickly. And this movie is anything but that. But talking a little bit about the Oscar race, it's sort of an interesting year. So here are the Best Picture nominees. All About Eve wins, Born Yesterday, Father of the Bride, King Solomon's Mines, which I don't know, never seen that movie, and then Sunset Boulevard. It's this odd year where most of the movies are quote unquote women pictures, as it was labeled at that time. The year before and the year after is a classic war movie situation, all the king's men and what have you at play. So it's interesting that you get Born Yesterday, Sunset Boulevard, All About Even, Father of the Bride, even though it's father in the title, it's still, I think, is more of a family
For sure.
movie, really, right?
Mhm.
So all these movies land in the same year. So I think that's very interesting. And maybe I'm no historian, so I don't know if this is sort of just a quick ushering in of what's going to come in the 60s and how the landscape is going to change and just society and movie making and what we reward. Because it's not in that era, it was not very often that a movie like this, which had so many powerful women characters, was rewarded and recognized this way. So I thought that's very interesting. Also interesting that Judy Holliday wins for Best Actress and not Betty Davis. So the narratives at that time, so you win some, you lose some, right? So the lose some here is that Judy Holliday is the ingenue who had done like small parts before this. This is sort of her first leading movie. Brilliant performance. I'm very happy she has an Oscar. Comedic performances that are slapstick and silly don't get recognized, and they're genius, and I think I'm so happy she won. Meanwhile, Betty Davis, who obviously iconic, is sort of making her quote unquote comeback in a movie of this stature and notoriety after some time. Only in her 40s, by the way, but in that time, it's sort of like she's portrayed as somebody who's like totally over the hill.
Yeah.
But it still stings me a little bit that I think Betty Davis should have an Oscar for All About Eve, putting her in the ranks of 3-time Oscar winners. Especially when you have someone like Frances McDormand, whose every performance is the same. That's my rant on Frances, even though I like her a lot. But I'm like, yeah, that person should not be in this elite group of people, and Betty Davis should be, I think. But people know that, so
right.
Yeah, that's sort of my number one. All About Eve. Whenever I'm thinking about the Oscars, and to your point, want to sort of rejuvenate my passion and belief in the Oscars, I put on this movie, and so it comforts me that this can happen.
No, definitely. I'm not sure if it can happen anymore, but maybe we can talk about that at the end. But yeah, so this is a film. I love this movie too. I actually saw this for the first time in film school, which was lucky because I saw it at USC. They have a 400, 500 person theater that some of these classes will be held in. So I got to see this in a movie theater on film for the first time. And I'd heard about it. Oh, it's supposed to be good, whatever, but just blew me away for all the reasons you mentioned. Performance is fantastic. The screenplay is fantastic. And it's funny too. It's one of those movies, like the basic premise of a, almost over the hill star, and a young ingenue comes up and then tries to dethrone that star. Having grown up in the 80s and 90s, so many sitcom and cartoons literally lift the plot and adapt it. So I'm like, I've seen this story like on Looney Tunes, on Animaniacs, on every sitcom. There's an episode that basically cribs from the plot of All But Eve. But it's one of those scenarios where you go back to the original thing that everyone was like ripping off. Yeah. And the original is like, I'm like, oh, this is so good. Now I know why all those like references were made to all the media that I watched as a kid. Even some, movies like we touched on Black Swan a couple episodes ago. That is very much in this similar vein. And another movie that I really like that maybe at some point we'll talk about on this show, Showgirls, the Verhoeven film from the 90s, was definitely an attempt.
Notorious. Yeah,
I think a very successful attempt to take that same formula and try to say some different things about it. But no, I think this movie is definitely one of those, like you said, of if you're just sort of disheartened or disenchanted with the Oscars, you go back and you watch something like this and you're like, oh, this deserves all the accolade that it got, even though it beat out one of my favorite movies of all time, Sunset Boulevard, which I think is in my top 15, but All About Eve. Okay. If I'm going to let one movie surpass Sunset Boulevard, All About Eve, like definitely deserving of that. It's just a fantastic movie. If folks listening haven't seen it, I cannot more highly praise and recommend this movie enough. It's amazing for all the reasons that you said. So.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.